Hi, this is Paul Metsa. Welcome to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. Chuck Berry passed away on March 18th, 2017. This show is going to be all about Chuck Berry. On my far left is Rick Shefchik, a former Pioneer Press reporter and columnist, author of 4 novels and 5 works of nonfiction, including his most recent book, Everybody's Heard About the Bird, The True Story of 1960s Rock and Roll in Minnesota. Next to him, the best-looking drummer in rock and roll, Mr. Bobby Vandell. Bobby has been a mainstay in the Twin Cities music scene for over 4 decades and has played with everyone from Bonnie Raitt, Lamont Cranston, the TC Jammers, Paul Metsa, and had one memorable gig with Chuck Berry. Last but not least, sitting next to me is a true Midwest country legend, Mr. Sherwin Linton. Sherwin has been inaugurated into 11 different Hall of Fames, including the Minnesota Music Hall of Fame, the Minnesota Country Music Hall of Fame, and the South Dakota Citizens Hall of Fame, along both Sitting Bull and Tom Brokaw. Bobby Vandell, we're going to talk a little bit a little later in the show about you actually did a gig with the great Chuck Berry. But did you ever see him in concert before that at any rock festivals?
No, never saw Chuck before.
Let's talk a little bit about young Bobby Vandell going to see live rock and roll shows, because it's all kind of related where you get the bug, you know?
Yeah.
Rock and roll. What did you see for the first time back growing up in St. Cloud?
Wow, man. I mean, St. Cloud was a lot of people wouldn't think this, but St. Cloud was rich in live music. I mean, we had St. Cloud State College, so we got a lot of entertainment over there. I remember walking across the river to see Elton John and Chicago Transit Authority and a lot of, you know, incredible Ike and Tina Turner, a lot of people right in St. Cloud, you know. Of course, we had a ballroom where Frank Sinatra had come earlier before I was able to go, you know, old enough to go, but
right.
All the big band era was there, Stan Kenton and Jimmy Dorsey and Tommy Dorsey and all those great bands, Buddy Rich Orchestra. We were rich, and that was my influence, you know, was all that live music and the music that my parents would play in the house, like all of us, you know. It's our earlier influence.
I was doing a lot of reading after Chuck Berry died about, you know, he had an influence on so many levels of not only music, but the culture in general, like we're talking about. And I posted about, you know, when you think about it, we were talking about how 55 how America went from black and white to color. But he really, Chuck Berry was as responsible for just about anybody, is really kick-starting the last half of the 20th century into what we know now as the modern times. And you look at any of these rock and roll shows that you used to go to, Rick, that you were talking about. It's in your book. Everybody's heard about the Bird, history of 1960s Minnesota rock and roll. But the big culmination, August 1969, you're the only guy I know that was there. Bobby Vandell was at Woodstock.
That's right.
Tell us about that.
Well, you know, I was young. I was 16, and I had been to a festival in Milwaukee called the Midwest Rock Festival, Led Zeppelin and Blind Faith and groups like that. And I saw an ad for this concert out on the East Coast called the Woodstock Music and Art Fair. And I looked at the lineup and I thought, it looks pretty good, you know. And I went home and I thought about it. And one day I just decided I'm going to go, you know. And I found an older woman, an 18-year-old woman, and I escaped out of the. I wrote a note to my parents, and I climbed out the basement window, and I
just wrote a note.
I did, and I picked her up.
Easier to ask forgiveness than permission.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I went and picked her up. She climbed out of her window, and we walked out to Highway 10, and we started hitchhiking.
You hitchhiked to Woodstock.
We did. I was 16, she was 18, and here's the funny thing. Her dad got really angry and wanted me arrested for taking her over a state line. And my dad said, she's 18, he's 16, I should have your daughter arrested for taking my son over a state line. He's the one that's underage. So we got the fathers fighting with each other, you know, and we were out there having fun, and Yeah, my mom was all up in arms. She said, you know, Bobby ran away, and my dad said, he didn't run away, he just ran to something else.
Right.
He'll be back.
To the circus.
Right, and her dad made her fly home, and my dad said he got himself out there, he can get himself back. So
We've just got a few
I
minutes
got
left.
myself back.
A few minutes in this segment of the Wall of Power Radio Hour. Did you see Hendrix? Were you up for
I
that?
did. But that was the third time I saw Hendrix.
Wow.
Yeah.
But what was it like? That was kind of the third day of the festival.
Oh yeah, there were hardly any people left then. A lot of people had split, you know, and it was like 6, 7 in the morning, something like that, when Jimmy came on. Yeah, that was the third time I had seen Jimmy.
How was Sly and the Family Stone? That looked like an amazing, from the movie.
You know, it was all incredible to me. Yeah. I felt, when I was there, I felt like I was the only one there that was focused totally on the music. I wasn't interested in drugs. I wasn't interested in taking mud baths or being naked or whatever they were doing. I knew the names of every people on that stage, and that's all I was focused on.
How about Richie Havens?
Yeah, he opened the show.
Yeah.
And that was an inspiring thing. I had not heard of Richie Havens at that time. That was the first time I saw him.
How was the sound there? Because you see, I mean, it looked like, you know, it was a nice sound system, but there was 500,000 people there.
Yeah, I stationed...
And if Havens was playing an acoustic guitar
Yeah,
through
it was.
SM58.
I stationed myself pretty close, so I was hearing the stage sound as well as the PA. Of course, the technology for miking up instruments back then was not, you know, nearly what it is now. It was pretty primitive. I thought it sounded great to me, but I was 16, so
Right.
I had never been to a show like that. So it sounded great to me, man. I'll tell you that.
When's the second time you saw Chuck Berry, Sherwin? About a minute left before the end of the segment.
Okay, saw him at the Walker Arts Center, 1969, and he came out. They had a three-piece band that was put there by the union, bass, drums, and guitar, and he went in about 16 bars of his first song, and then he quietly told them they didn't have to play because he recognized they were definitely not familiar with his style. And he did the whole show, and he did My Ding-a-Ling. I even wrote some of the words down to that and learned it myself. He hadn't recorded it yet then. And also another selection that he did, which I still love, was a narration that he'd written called Pass Away.
I want to talk about that because it's something I was, as I was doing my reading, about how we love to end shows with a poem. We'll be back with Rick, Bobby, and Sherwin on the Wall of Power Radio Hour. We're going to listen to somebody else do a great version of Johnny Be Good.
I want you to meet Two Gingers Irish Whiskey. I'm Kieran and I'm Irish, so I tend to like a challenge. Why not? I wanted a whiskey to help find me out what's out there. Like what's really out there. And I found the oldest distillery in Ireland with a water wheel and awards for its small family of whiskies in the middle of Ireland. As I've always seen it, you can't win the lottery unless you buy a ticket. So try it. The investment is small and the flavor is big. It's perfect for drinking neat. Its character holds up, like the Irish, when the bastards try to get you down. Two Gingers Irish Whiskey. Distilled twice for more character, time for more flavor, and less of the old burn. No lite bastardes carborundum. Don't let the bastards get you down.
Welcome back to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. We're talking about Chuck Berry tonight, a man who passed away on March 18th, 2017. We've got Rick Shefchik, Bobby Vandell, and Sherwin Linton. At the end of the last segment, Sherwin, you were talking about a poem that Chuck Berry read, and then you have a great story to follow that up.
Yeah, he had a poem that he did on that show called Pass Away, and it's on one of his albums too, a later album, and it's a very spiritual poem that has quite a story to it. Even this shall pass away, about all the different elements of going through a life, and is a very interesting poem. And after the show, I walked out of there, and he was going out a side door of the Walker Arts Center.
And this was, did you say 1969, Sherwin?
1969, okay. And had his guitar and a briefcase, and assume he had his money in the briefcase.
Yeah.
Anyway, I kind of hollered at him. I said, "Hey, Chuck, would you sign my program?" And
Which he rarely did over the years. He didn't like signing autographs.
Right, yeah. But I didn't know that. And
Sure.
So he paused a moment. I walked over to him. He said, I have to get away from here. He said, "Are you with somebody?" I said, "Yes, I'm with my wife." And so he said, "Well, if she can wait here, you can come down to my car," which was parked on Kenwood.
Sure.
And he says, "I'll give you a ride down to the corner. I'll sign it."
And what was he driving?
I think it was a Cadillac, but I don't remember for sure. I was so excited that I'm going to be in a car with Chuck Berry. I mean,
Right. How cool is that?
Driving a block or so.
Right.
But anyway, we got down to the corner, and he took the program and signed it. Charles Berry.
Wow.
And I had written some of the lyrics to My Ding-a-Ling, which he did on the show as well.
And you had never heard that tune before?
Never heard it, no. And I think part of the reason he did that possibly was because he was doing the show by himself without the band.
Right.
They stood on stage the whole time, but didn't play. I can't believe that happened, because he was well known not to trust anybody.
Right.
And
And you got to ride in the car with him on Kenwood Parkway. How cool is that? We've got a guy, Bobby Vandell, a good buddy of mine, a great drummer here in town, who actually played with Chuck Berry. Tell us, from the time you got the phone call to the day to the gig, and how you felt afterwards, Bobby.
Got to, and you know, it should be noted that there's probably, I was thinking the other day, there's probably thousands of drummers that have played
Right.
with Chuck Berry, because unfortunately, Chuck didn't feel he could afford a band.
Right.
So he toured, every time he toured, he just picked up bands in every city.
Although I read something by Max Weinberg, Springsteen's drummer, who got a chance to sit down with Chuck. He said, "Chuck," he goes, "why do you just pick up these bands from town to town?" And at that time, Chuck said, "Well, the reason why I want to do is I want as many musicians in the world to play Chuck Berry music with Chuck Berry." But he was probably cheap, too. But anyway,
I don't.
thought it was a good way of looking
I
at
would
it.
question that.
Yeah.
You know, Chuck got about. You know, it was very interesting. I mean, I got the call from Dick Hedlund, a local bass player who had played with Chuck a number of times, and to do the gig. It was at a casino in eastern Wisconsin. Drove there, and Chuck drove up with his black Cadillac, and you kind of stole my thunder, because the first thing we had to do was get in the car with Chuck. And I jumped in the front seat, and I was sitting next to him, and
Of course, you jumped in the front seat.
Of course. Well, I wanted to sit next to Chuck. I mean,
course.
And you're
the drummer, man.
one of the
Important
architects of rock and roll, and you know, I felt like I was in a temple. Like it was just like the temple of rock and roll. I never felt that close to that energy of
Right.
you know, someone responsible for inventing
The
this,
genesis.
and really inventing this this genre, this music, and that was our rehearsal. I don't really remember what he said, because I was just enamored by, like you said, being in the car with Chuck
Sure,
Berry.
how could you not?
And then we got out, and we went on stage, and we played, and You know, there was an element of sadness, I think, to this.
What year was that, Bobby?
96
Okay.
for me. Of course, this had been going on for years. Should talk about the concert in '86 that Keith Richards put his own personal money into.
Yeah.
Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, where he put an all-star band together for Chuck. That's
Beautiful
another
film.
story. But we jumped on stage, and you know, there was an element of sadness to this because I think Chuck had forgotten his own genius, you know, and his own genius of all these great songs that he wrote. And people tend to morph those songs all into one. They weren't one song. They were all different musically. They were all incredible songs. And by now, in 1996, Chuck was just getting the money, you know?
Right.
And it was kind of sad in that sense because he really had forgotten his own genius.
Well, you know, on the part of that Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, when, you know, Keith Richards said anytime he's hung out with Chuck Berry, he's ended up wounded to some degree. And Chuck takes him to task for the opening riff to Carol.
Right.
He said, that's not the way it's played.
Right.
And it's on film.
Right.
Really terrific
Right.
honesty in
Right.
filmmaking there.
You know, we got on stage, and it was sad in the sense that his guitar was out of tune. One thing that was amazing is that he played the 1-4-5 progressions of his songs, but he didn't go to the 4 or the 5 when you should.
Right.
He hung on, so we're kind of laying in the weeds, trying to predict when he's going to go to the 4.
Like a real blues cat.
It
like
was,
Lightning
yeah, it was the
Hopkins or
real,
something.
yeah, exactly, like Howlin' Wolf or someone like that. So that was amazing to me, but his guitar was out of tune, and it was a kind of sad in a way, but amazing experience. And he got $10,000, put it in a briefcase, put it in the back of his car, and the story is that if he doesn't like the band, he takes the full $10,000. If he does like the band, he leaves $1,000 left for the band, and he left $1,000 for the band that night.
I want to thank you guys for being on the Wall of Power Radio Hour. Sherwin Linton, Bobby Vandell, Rick Shefchik. This is really enlightening. Hail, hail, rock and roll.
This is his autobiography. Would you welcome Mr. Chuck Berry? Chuck.
What can you do with so much space? The Solar Arts Building in Northeast Minneapolis. A masterpiece of exposed brick, wooden beams, hardwood floors, and natural light, this unique multi-use space is perfect for a variety of events. To literally top it off, there are over 100 solar panels on the roof, making the Solar Arts Building self-sustainable. You've got the need, we've got the space. The Solar Arts Building, 711 Northeast 15th Avenue in beautiful Northeast Minneapolis. Give them a call at 763-234-5069 or send a message to mike@solarartsbuilding.com.
Me a cute little toy, silver bells hanging on a string. She told me it was my ding-a-ling-a-ling, oh my. Ding-a-ling, 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 ding-a-ling. sir. We got about 130 ladies singing now. It really gets to you. Wait till we get about the 5th verse. All the ladies will be singing.
Rick, I want to go to you as kind of the historian in this bunch today. The people that grew up in that time who had never heard Chuck Berry heard My Ding-a-Ling and associated him with that song, which was his only #1 hit.
That is probably one of the great ironies of his career. This was 1972 when the song actually topped the charts. And and I mentioned that some of his stuff was smutty in the past, but it was very subtly so. This one was kind of overtly smutty, but the early 70s were such an odd time because you almost thought that pornographic movies were going to pass into the mainstream,
Right.
And Chuck had been off to the charts essentially since about 1965. He had not had a hit.
What was his last hit?
Well, back in
Sherwin, you got it?
64, it was probably No Particular Place to Go, possibly Nadine.
Nadine, and he did a rewrite of Memphis called Little Marie.
By 1965, though, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Beach Boys and Motown had totally changed the landscape of pop music.
But Rolling Stones, Beatles, and the Beach Boys, the backbone of their stuff was Chuck Berry.
Absolutely. And you could probably say the same thing about Motown, because you have to assume that Berry Gordy took a look at what Chuck Berry did and took what was essentially rhythm and blues, an idiom that the white audience was not interested in, and transformed it into mainstream pop, which he did the same thing with soul music. He turned Motown from a R&B specialty label into the most mainstream label in America. I mean, everybody was listening to Motown by the mid-'60s, and that wouldn't have happened without Chuck Berry.
Bobby, you, like me, have played thousands of gigs. So you've played, played with Bonnie Raitt, you played with Lamont Cranston, the TC Jammers. What do you think over the years has Chuck Berry kind of flown in and out of the set list?
Oh, well, yeah, for sure. I mean, you just play, he's there all the time, But you generally play the same songs, Nadine,
right.
Johnny Be Good, Maybelline. So, you
Too Much Monkey Business.
A little bit. You play the songs that people mostly know.
Right. But isn't it amazing? Everybody does know those tunes.
Yeah.
And not only can sing the lyrics. I mean, not just sing along, but actually know the lyrics.
Yeah. Another one was, which Elvis had a pretty good record with, The Promised Land.
Yeah.
And also one that I do and close our show with quite often, not quite as well known, but Sweet Little Rock and Roller.
Yeah, beautiful
She's
tune.
9 years old and sweet as she can be, all dressed up like a downtown Christmas tree.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the tune The Promised Land, which has just a great story about traveling across country. But we were talking at the beginning of the show about how Maybelline really came from the old country song that Bob Wills performed called Ida Red. But if you listen to The Promised Land, it's really a revved up version of the Wabash Cannonball.
Yeah, that's right.
Don't you think?
Yeah, that very, very true. Yeah.
Let's not forget my favorite Christmas song of all time, Run, Run, Rudolph.
Yeah. Who Keith Richards did a great version of.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think Springsteen plays it during the holidays.
And it should be said, you alluded to the fact before that those groups, took Chuck Berry songs and got famous on them. A lot of white groups back then didn't give credit to the black artists they were stealing from. The Rolling Stones were different. I mean, they really did give Chuck a lot of credit.
Right.
They gave everybody credit to the point where Keith Richards came out of his own pocket to produce that movie, Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, and to honor Chuck Berry's 60th birthday. So I think it should be noted that those were some classy guys that did that. There were groups that did not do that. There you go. And Bonnie is the same way.
Yeah.
Bonnie pays back. She's got the Rhythm and Blues Foundation. She got a lot of old blues artists dental work that they desperately needed. She paid for all of that. She's another huge supporter of of black artists without them, we wouldn't have this music that we have now.
You know, somebody asked me the other day, you know, what one word comes to mind when you think about Chuck Berry's legacy, and I guess the word for me is everlasting. It's lasted this long. He was 90 years old and still considered relevant on the day he died, and I don't see any time in the future where his music isn't going to matter to people.
No, that's true. That's very true. It should be noted, too, he was married to the same woman for 68 years.
I don't know if it was completed, but there was a new Chuck Berry record
Coming out this year.
Yeah.
It's called Chuck. It's coming out this year, 1917.
Keep it simple.
Yep.
Keep that title simple.
I heard that the first single off of it may be released within 2 weeks.
Wow.
Really?
You'll have to run down and get it, Sherwin.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, except it won't be on a 45 RPM record. But
You still got time to record it and release it first.
you know,
Touche, Vandell. All right. Vandell 1, Sherwin 0.
musical association and genres have been with country music, rock and roll, rockabilly, folk, gospel, all and pop, all slammed together. In 61 years of my musical career, I've always felt that there's no country music guitar player, no rock and roll guitar player that has not been influenced by Chuck Berry's guitar playing. Even if they don't know they were influenced,
Oh, absolutely.
they've been influenced by
It's
it.
totally true. Well, that's why you see all these people paying respect, you know.
Yep.
When Keith put that concert together, Eric Clapton, and, you know, I mean, there wasn't anybody that didn't come out of the woodwork to pay their respect to Chuck Berry.
This has really been phenomenal. Bobby, anything you'd like to add?
You know, I want to say what an honor it is to be with all you guys. With your book, I just really enjoyed your book, as I told you. Long overdue book about the Minnesota music scene, and such a pleasure to be next to you and hang out with you.
Pleasure is
Paul.
mine.
Long friendship. I love
Thanks,
it.
Roberto. Love you.
I'm honored to be with you guys. So thank you for having me. That's what I want to say.
Thank you, Paul.
Well, thank you, Sherwin. Thank you, Rick. This has been
Thanks,
really
Paul.
enjoyable. And go out and buy some Chuck Berry records and turn it up to 11 and have a ball.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.